Big game breakdown as number 11 Texas travels to Tuscaloosa to take on number 3 Alabama. A 1-point result a year ago. We had Quinn Ewers come out, look amazing at the beginning of the game, and then got hurt. It was disappointing development, especially for those Longhorns fans. Quinn Ewers not hurt, and the offense locked and loaded. They came off the game against Rice. Alabama comes off the win against Middle Tennessee. Let's begin with that Texas offense. But what can we take from the Rice result and project forward going up against an Alabama defense that you and I have discussed and referenced often might be the best in the country? How does that side, when Texas has the ball, what really stands out? What will you be looking at?
So Texas definitely has weapons, right? Like they have 3 really impressive receivers in Mitchell and Worthy as a Neuer. I think that they have a really good offensive line. They obviously have a super matchup problem tight end in Jatavian Sanders, and they have some young backs who I think are good players. And they have Quinn Ewers, who looked pretty impressive in the spring, and all of the media narrative out of there is that he has continued to improve. And it's one data point, but they didn't look great against Rice.
It was slow. It was a little bit slow to get started. It can be unsettling. I understand, especially in comparison to what we saw in Tuscaloosa. But.
No, for sure. Now look, will Quinn Ewers get in sync with his receivers? Will the drop back game look better? Like eventually they hit some wide open stuff and scored, and they handled Rice kind of like you should handle Rice. And I do think that there's an element of, I'm sure Rice, which has been kind of improving on the defensive front, but still it's Rice. Like that's not a good D line relative to like Big 12 standards, certainly not to Alabama standards. That thing gave you some trouble. So was it that you are not as good as people think you are up front? Or maybe Texas has been prepping for Alabama for like 3 weeks. Rice threw some stuff at them that either they didn't prep for or they didn't know was coming, and basically said, you know what? We don't care. We have been working on this Bama game because whether we beat Rice by 20 or 50, it doesn't particularly matter. And maybe they have something coming. I will say, like Sark in these big matchup games, there's not a lot of guys who are better, Chip, as far as figuring out matchups to isolate his playmakers on them, trying to make things easy for Quinn Ewers. To me, it's the offensive line. Like, has it taken the step that you need it to take? Because I do kind of think that Bama's front seven has taken that step. I think Bama has the best defense in the country if they're healthy, which Key and Malachi went down last game. So we'll see if they play. But like those are 2 starters in the secondary who really matter to me.
Texas running the ball, the numbers don't look fantastic.
No.
From the Rice game. That seems concerning. I know we got to see my guy CJ Baxter out there. I know we've got a couple backs that are all going to be in there, but maybe that speaks to the offensive line part. Where is the weakness? Like if Sark is sitting here and he's knowing, of course he's going to know what the Alabama defense, especially with Kevin Steele back and Nick Saban. I mean, we're just like picking right out of the classic Nick Saban Alabama defense book. Who Steve Sarkisian, and we talked about this a lot about just Saban in general, has had to go head to head with that defense as Alabama's offensive coordinator and being a part of that staff. Where do you think the weakness is on this Alabama defense?
Well, if those DBs are out, it's clearly there.
Okay.
Right.
You've got so many good weapons at wide receiver. We're going to trot out all these multiple looks and at some point find the duck. Whoever the worst player on the field is going to end up across from Xavier Worthy, and it's green light go. That's what's happening.
So the other point on this is I do legitimately think that Texas defense is pretty good, and we'll get there. So if you're Sark, you're probably thinking, I need to score what, 30?
To win?
Can 28 win you this ball game? The total here is 54, right? So, I mean, the implied is like 30 to 24-ish. With if you take the total,
that feels right,
and the spread, roughly so. So I don't think it's a game where Sark goes in thinking, hey, I need to score 38. I need to score 45. Can Sark create coverage busts because of his understanding of the coverage rules that Nick Saban's offense runs? Can he do so against blitz, which will ultimately be a question of, can Texas block Bama's like non-blitz pressures and force Bama to get into the blitz stuff more? I think your odds of beating it go up quite a bit if you're able to protect. I mean, this is just common sense. Yeah, if Bama gets home with 4, then it's basically night-night, right? How will Texas handle pressures on the road? At times last year, they did not. Oklahoma State. At times, though, they did. They whipped Kansas State and basically just crushed them in the first half. If you go back to that game, Sark really got in his bag, man. They went like a bunch of unbalanced stuff. They understood the safety rotations and what Kansas State wanted to do, and they hit a lot of those open side runs there and just messed up Kansas State's defense. Like they got a couple, you don't want to call them cheapies, but they were really scheme touchdowns in that game early, and it allowed Texas to play with the lead. Same? No doubt. Right? That's what I'm saying. So, like, yes, Texas has the ability to win some one-on-one matchups here for sure, because they are, I think, that talented at receiver. How many freebies? How many WTFOs, right? What wide open shots can you create if you're Sark to help out Quinn Ewers? The one read stuff, the stuff when you break the huddle, you're like, all right, if we get this look, this is the only guy I really need to look at. If not, and be okay with that, because I don't think that they're going to consistently drive the ball down and down bases. This is not going to be a 50% success rate game or a 40%er for Texas. They have to find ways to create some explosives, whether that's a matchup one-on-one they like jump ball type stuff, or if it's finding a way to create busts in Alabama's coverage.
So the other side of this is Texas's defense going up against Alabama. Again, Jalen Milroe, we believe to be the quarterback here. Hard to nitpick too much, though there certainly are places where Alabama had some misses, where Jalen Milroe had some misses against Middle Tennessee. Again, it's tough. We're looking at Rice, Middle Tennessee. What's the key here for Texas's defense going up against that? We'll start up front. That Alabama offensive line group that took a lot of shuffling through fall camp. Caden Proctor, it's good to see that big boy out there competing at tackle in a game after so much hype about him from the recruiting trail, spring practice and fall camp. So how do you think it works? We'll start in the trenches when Alabama has the ball.
Sure. So I would go a couple things here. One, tackling is going to be really important for Alabama, because I do think, or for Texas rather, excuse me. Tackling, really important for Texas. You're going to want to see if Milroe can consistently be accurate in that short to medium range game, because if he's not, then it's going to get him off schedule. And I do not have faith in Alabama's drop back game if they're behind the chains, really at all. Like, I did not see that from them in that game.
Well, they didn't have much. I mean, wasn't there like success rate like 60%?
Sure. And look at the spring game stuff, right? Yeah. Like, not it's not an element that they have showcased with Milroe. Go back to A&M last year. Now, new offensive scheme, new coordinator, etc. I do think that Bama, though, is capable of creating some wide open stuff, some explosives on their own, as long as they're able to get the run game going a little bit. If you're Texas, being multiple, creating confusion for that Alabama offensive line, which is super powerful, but middle did it a little bit, man. I'm not gonna lie. Like, think about what TCU did to Texas last year. Like, they didn't whip them up front physically. They created a lot of confusion to where like some of their doubles were off and the backers were able to fill quickly. Getting Bama behind the chains, winning early downs, tackling well to where that screen is tackled for 3, not 7 yards, not points, is going to be really critical here. And if Texas can create a lot of long down and distances for Alabama, I really like its chances. But if they don't, if Bama stays ahead of the chains, Bama will hit an explosive run or two, and I think that they have a chance to physically impose their will, and then they'll probably hit a play action shot or two over the top. So really, it also comes down, and this is not great analysis by me, but Bama needs its defense, I think, to hold Texas to the 20s or like very low 30s. If this becomes a game where they have to go out and score 40, I think the Tide is in trouble. But if Bama's defense is as good as I think it is, then I think Bama could be able to play the game within its comfort level.
Danny Cannell in the chat. We appreciate Danny in the chat
Danny.
on an airplane actually might be a reoccurring segment, depending on his travel schedule with CBS. So he mentioned the quarterback run game. You think that let's say over under 17.5 rushing attempts for Jalen Milroe in this game?
Designed, or like we're counting like NCAA style?
Yeah. Box score at the end of it. That includes scrambles because look, him confusion, blitzers coming from a different direction, him taking off running, that's not a designed run, but if it gets him 7 yards and a first down, then it is, just as significant as anything else.
17.5 is a big number. That's like Jeff Sims. I'm going to go under, but not by much.
Like 13, 14, somewhere around there.
Like 2 to 3 sacks, 4 to 5 scrambles, and probably like 2 designed rushes per quarter ish. That feels about right to me. If you guys did not watch the Middle Tennessee State game, guys, Milroe there are very few guys in the country who can run like he can. Like, he is a legitimate running threat, open field speed, but also like a big kid.
Oh, dude,
his
movement in the open field, he can bounce off guys. He can make guys miss. It is an electric experience to watch Jalen Milroe out there running the football.
There's no doubt about it. I think Bama's really physical, and it's going to be on Texas to bring the physicality to this ball game to stand up in order to give Sark a chance to create some of those, some of the chalkboard stuff. And that's not to say that Tommy Rees is a bad OC. I don't think he is, but like Tommy Rees can win this football game with a relatively straightforward plan. I think Texas has to win the coaching matchup to win the ball game.
Ooh, and that's a tough ask when we're talking about Steve Sarkisian against Nick Saban. Who needs this one more?
I know this sounds crazy, but I actually think Bama. And they missed the playoff last year. I think the last time Nick Saban has lost a non-conference regular season game was Louisiana Monroe.
Oh, that's
Wasn't
a good nugget. Let's nail that in.
2008, they faced Clemson in the Dome, right? And they beat them. They didn't lose in the regular season in 2009 because they went, didn't they go undefeated in 2009?
In the national championship?
Yeah. 2010, they lost 3 times, but that was 2 SEC losses, South Carolina and somebody, and then they lost to
Auburn.
Yeah, South Carolina, Auburn, and then somebody in the bowl game. I forgot who it was. Was that the Utah year, maybe?
But a regular season non-conference loss.
game. I don't think they've lost since 2007. That was my 1L year at Bama in law school. I remember the yellow school bus jokes because they took the school buses up there allegedly from Monroe. Damn, we're old. I mean, if you lose this game and you're Nick, I think that's tough, man. Like, you basically have to run the table to get back into the playoff.
So there have been 2 ways to attack this, and I've seen both cases presented. That Nick Saban, who has been very open in talking about his concerns about this football team and places where he thinks that the expectation maybe shouldn't be championship or bust, and he has identified specific concerns and big picture concerns. That he has continued to say this very openly to the media, and on one side we've been like, yeah, sure, whatever, it's Alabama. Well, you'll be fine. This is Nick Saban just nitpicking, let's call it. Or there is the we should have listened to Nick Saban refrain that we'll have if Alabama falls short. And revisionist history looks at the last 2 seasons and says Bryce Young might have been masking a lot of problems with his individual excellence. Is this the end of the dynasty, as Danny Cannell has said? If Alabama wins this game by 14 points, if Alabama gets a double-digit win with physicality on defense, running the ball, and just simply being bigger, stronger, then I'm going to say, all right, it is not the same Alabama, but it is a vintage of Alabama that we're used to. It's a 2015 Alabama, a 2016 Alabama. Jalen Hurts as a freshman winning a SEC Offensive Rookie of the Year as they're just able to play elite defense and physically overpower you at the line of scrimmage, hit enough explosive plays, win enough of those battles through the passing game that they're going to be able to contend for an SEC championship. If Texas goes into Bryant-Denny Stadium and comes out with the win, then it's we should have been listening to Nick Saban the whole time, because this might not be a special group.
I mean, you're going to lose some really important players off this defense next year and off the offensive line, right? Like J.C. Latham, Tyler Booker, a couple other experienced guys along the line will be gone. Now they replace them, but those are pretty high-level guys. A lot of guys on defense are likely to be gone to the draft. So I think Nick Saban likes this football team. I think he understands it's limited, but you just haven't watched. I mean, I know you watch his press conferences all the time too. Like,
oh, he's been smiling more.
Yeah,
and he likes the way they compete. He likes the edge.
I think he likes the way they practice.
Yeah, I agree.
Like now it doesn't mean that they're awesome. Clearly, the passing game so far appears to be a limiting factor. Maybe it will explode. If it does, everybody else should just go home. Like if Milroe turns into an elite passer, it's done.
I learned nothing about the receivers from the Middle Tennessee game.
Right. They were run bys and middle lost corners like DeCorian. Help me out here. Who was the really good middle corner last year? Is at UCF now. DeCorian Patterson. I mean, like middle lost their good corners, so they were run bys for Bama. Totally.
Yeah. Did not seem like I was watching Alabama's wide receiver play level up in that game.
Oh,
yeah.
Tyler Booker's a sophomore. I thought he was a junior now. That's crazy. That kid's a sophomore, by the way. Thank you for the chat for correcting me. That dude's freak.